This video, we are going to be looking at the origin of the solar system. But again, first, before we proceed, let me just reiterate to you that again, in science, we are never sure about 100% about a lot of things, but at least we have a degree of confidence. Uh, if we find an ancient clay pot, we wouldn't be sure 100% where it came from, who was the owner of it, but at least we have a high degree of confidence based on the location, based on the circumstantial placement of it, geographical location, based on the objects around it that we find surrounding it in its location. So those things. How much more when we are dealing with a much deeper question like how was the solar system formed? So just keep that in mind. But again, science works pretty well, right? We might not be sure about a lot of things, but science works pretty well. So that's one thing that you have to keep in mind. Okay. But first of all, before we delve into it, let's have a recap of what the solar system is. Okay. So as you know, the solar system is made up of the sun, right? That's why it's called solar, because sol means sun. And then the 8 major planets. So you have Mercury, Venus, Earth, Mars, Jupiter, Saturn, Uranus, and Uranus and Neptune. Right now, these are the planets, and again, we have to kind of take a look at the properties of it. So this is obviously the star of our solar system, and then you have Mercury, Venus, Earth, and Mars. For these four are what we call terrestrial planets, meaning these are the inner planets and these are the rocky planets. So when we go into them, we find that they are made up of these rocky, solid, metal-y materials, right? A lot of metals, a lot of silicates that makes up rock. So these are the rocky planets. And then Jupiter, Saturn, Uranus, and Neptune, these are kind of gas giants. So they are mostly made up of gas particles, or at least what would be gas if it were in Earth. So if you can imagine, for example, hydrogen gas. In Earth, hydrogen is mostly gas. But obviously, as you have known when we discussed about the core and the inner core, anything, even if it's a gas, if you compress it too much, it might become solid or liquid, right? But the point is, you have a central star, you have the terrestrial planets, inner planets, which are rocky, made up of metal rocky materials, and then we have the giants, the gas planets. The gas giants like Jupiter, Saturn, and then you have the icy planets like Neptune and Uranus. Okay. Now, that's not all of it, because as you know, a few years back, we have Pluto included as the 9 major planets, but now Pluto has been demoted as a minor planet. And again, let's address that issue because a lot of people hasn't moved on from Pluto being not a major planet. And the reason for that is this. Okay, this is a solar system, and these are the 9 planets here. I hope you can see my cursor. But as we know, in the years that have passed, obviously the instruments that we use to look up in the sky are not that sophisticated enough. And then it evolved, and then we realized that beyond the 8 planets, we actually have a belt of Kuiper Belt materials, Kuiper Belt objects. We call this the Kuiper Belt. Kind of similar to how between Mars and Jupiter, there's an asteroid belt where we find a lot of asteroids, right? Beyond Neptune, there is a belt called Kuiper Belt, and guess what? Pluto is just part of that Kuiper Belt. So we can either call Pluto as a Kuiper Belt object or at least a trans-Neptunian object, meaning an object beyond Neptune. Okay. At first, By the way, let me just give you context that when we draw the planets, we always draw like the Sun, Mercury, Venus, Mars, and so on and so forth, Earth. But Pluto always has this orbit that is kind of off. It's always like that. This is the orbit of Pluto. That was actually the first hint that Pluto was not a major planet, because all the 8 planets revolve around the sun in a plane, right? In a flat kind of flat orientation. But Pluto is kind of off to this side and not really following the plane at all. So that was the first hint. And in fact, when we look at the Kuiper Belt objects, a lot of them actually do not follow the plane of the major planets. They follow kind of, some of them do not revolve like this, but some of them are kind of off at an angle, and so on. So that is the reason. Pluto is not a major planet, not because scientists just simply decided one day to demote it, but because again we learned more things, and when we learned about these things, we had a more sophisticated idea of how we defined a planet, and it just so happened that the properties of Pluto does not anymore belong to a planet. Okay, so again, I make this analogy. I'm very passionate about this because a lot of people still don't understand why Pluto is not a major planet. Again, the analogy is, imagine you are an alien and you're observing the earth, and obviously you see Americans, you see Filipinos, you see Chinese, you see all these uh, races of human beings, and then all of a sudden, for the first time, you see a monkey, right? And you have seen cows, you have seen dogs, you have seen insects, right? But this is the first time you saw a monkey. So for that alien, just because when you look at the monkey is bipedal, it has 2 arms, 2 legs, it has a tail, yes, but essentially it looks like a human being. So the head is, there's a head, 2 limbs, and they walk kind of upright. So that alien, if he would not explore the forest, he would think that that monkey is part of the human race, right? Just because the alien do not know better. But when he explores the forest and he sees gorillas, he sees rhesus monkeys, he sees the tarsier and all the other families of apes, then by that time, that alien would say, "Ah, now I know. This monkey does not really belong to the humans, but it is more akin to the apes." Obviously, there's a slight problem with that analogy, because um, human beings are technically apes, or at least we branch from the apes. But 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 at least you understand that, again, in science, our degree of confidence is built upon what we learn about other things. Because if you think about it, the way you define things is because of other things, right? Like, how do you define what dark is? Dark is the absence of light. Or how do you define what nothing is? Nothing is the absence of something. So definitions are relative to other stuff. So the more you learn about the other stuff surrounding that object, the more you kind of know what that object really belongs to. So the same for Pluto. Again, let me repeat. If an alien were for the first time, if an alien who knew about the human race, about dogs, other mammals, other animals on the earth, were to see the first monkey, were to see a monkey, he would miscategorize that monkey as part of the human being, just because the monkeys look like a human being, and they don't look like dogs or cats at all. But again, when he learns that there are other variants of the ape family, like gorillas and you know orangutans, then he would know better, and he would categorize monkey under apes and not in the human beings. So that is kind of what happened to Pluto. So the first hint was it doesn't follow the plane of the major planets. And then we discovered the Kuiper Belt, right? The Kuiper Belt. This is named after the scientist. I assume his surname is Kuiper, right? And so now that we have sophisticated telescopes, we see a lot of Kuiper Belt objects, a lot of trans-Neptunian objects like Aries, like Sedna, and other things. So the list now grows that again, when you look at Pluto and look at the major planets and look at Pluto and look at the trans-Neptunian objects and the Kuiper Belt, it's more likely that the properties of Pluto is akin to that of those that belong to the Kuiper Belt or the trans-Neptunian objects and not to the major planets. So, move on. Pluto is not a major planet. Okay? And then does the story stop there? Nope. Because aside from the Kuiper Belt, when scientists had more capabilities, guess what? We find the Oort Cloud. And again, this is again credited to that scientist. The Oort Cloud is a sphere surrounding the solar system, and these are comprised of billions of comets. Okay, obviously, when we look at a diagram like this, you might say, the solar system is so crowded, sir. But no, uh, that's the power of. That's the problem with diagrams because we could not put them into scale. Because if we put this into scale, we wouldn't see anything because these comets here are far apart from each other that we can't really tell, right? So, but again, if you have to make a diagram, you have to kind of compress them. You have to, if we put this into scale, then the dots are also smaller that we can't see them. So we make the dots bigger, and so they seem crowded. It seems crowded, but in reality, they are really very, 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 very far away from each other. Okay, so again, that's the solar system. We have the system of 8 planets in the center in a plane, and then you have the Kuiper Belt object, which is like a belt, so it's still sort of a plane, although some objects are off at an angle. And then when we zoom out, you still have this sphere of comets, right? Sphere of comets. So if you can imagine comets like the comets that were probably mentioned by ancient people in China, ancient people, even some of it was recorded by some claim that things that are mentioned in the Bible that the comet during when Jesus was born was that comet has a cycle and it comes up like every 600 years, every 700 years. So why would they be coming up 600 years, 400 years? Why such a long time? Because their orbit are also so far, so long. So maybe these comets either belong to the Kuiper Belt or they belong to the Oort Cloud. But in terms of probability, the Oort Cloud is mostly comprised of comet-like structures. Kuiper Belt, you might have a mix of comet-like structures and other asteroidal-like structures, but that's the idea. So the solar system is not the 8 planets, not at all. It's the sun, the 8 planets, and then beyond that there's a Kuiper Belt, and then beyond that there's the Oort Cloud. And why am I telling you this? Because this is not discussed fully in the lower years, and this is kind of important when we try to explain the origin of the solar system, because there are parts of the explanation that require you to understand the Kuiper Belt and the structure of the solar system from the 8 planets, terrestrial planets, gas planets, and then the icy planets, then the Kuiper Belt beyond that, and the Oort Cloud beyond that. So again, that is the structure of your solar system. Sun, 8 planets in a plane, then Kuiper Belt objects kind of still in a plane, but some are off at an angle. And then if you zoom out, you have a sphere of comets called the Oort Cloud.